All right, we are on air. Welcome.
Welcome, everyone.
Welcome to our summer development camp session number 1. Summer. It's summer everywhere, even in Oregon. We are joined from San Diego, Portland,
and
LA.
But before we introduce our guests, let's introduce ourselves.
All right.
Yes. I'm Jeremy Mitchell, the Vista leader for Maker Ed.
Steve Davey, Director of Education Communications.
And I'm Nancy Rink, the Program Coordinator.
That's us.
That's us.
That's us.
All right.
So we have a few announcements to make before we start our questions and topics. So most everyone has started at their institutions, and I just sent out the timesheets for all the Maker Corps members to their host site administrators. And I've also posted your timesheet and instructions on how to fill it out on the community. So if you haven't received it from your administrator, or if you can't access it online for some reason, let me know. But the evaluators will be contacting you at the beginning of July to receive the first timesheets, and then you're going to fill them out again for the other 2 months.
Outstanding. And we'd like to request, now that you're starting your work, if you've got a blog or a way that you're sharing work through Instagram or whatever account, please let us know, post it on the community so we can all follow your work throughout the summer. Sometimes you get so involved with the work that you forget to share that sort of thing until like the very end or something like that. But we want to be able to promote and show people what you're doing all along the way. So, and if you haven't done one, this will help inspire you to show you how simple it might be.
Yeah.
A few pictures, a few captions here and there, or elaborate blog posts and videos. We've seen the whole gamut. But we want to see what you're doing. We want to vicariously enjoy what goes on.
I've been able to see a couple of really great pictures via Twitter with the hashtag MakerCorps. It makes it really easy to just to click and follow. So that's a great one to sort of collect.
Yeah, and don't forget to share your planning process as well. We want to see behind the scenes. Yeah. So seeing the groups of Maker Corps members getting together and mentors and planning projects and experimenting with things. We want to see all of it. So share would be great.
We will be in the last 20 minutes of this broadcast. We're going to be inviting anyone who wants to come on to join us. If you want to ask a question just to us live, you can do so. I will also be, as always, monitoring the Q&A and the YouTube questions if you want to ask a question there.
Yeah, and you can find that link to get in directly on the community, also via email. So
let's let our guests introduce themselves, starting with...
absolutely. One last announcement before you...
Sorry, I'm really excited to find out who's joining us.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry, but this is free stuff. People like free stuff. So speaking of free stuff, we have a recent donation by Maker Media of PDF versions, ebooks of the Getting Started with the Intel Galileo, something we've been trying to get for a long time. They were a little busy with something called Maker Faire. So we finally...
It's really not that big of a deal.
It really isn't. I don't know what to do. We're in after Maker Faire world. Ooh,
that was so easy.
Yeah, so now that they've come back to Earth, they said, yeah, we'll donate some copies to you. So as the first batch, and there potentially will be more in the future, the first 20 people that let me know that they would like a PDF copy that you'll actually be using of Getting Started with Intel Galileo, let me know, and very soon I'll have discount codes and everything where you can download that online directly from Makerhead. So that's coming. That's the last announcement I have. And now to the more interesting people. All
right,
let's start with Cassandra.
Cassandra, introduce yourself and tell us where you are.
And unmute yourself,
who you are and what are you doing. And unmute.
Yeah. Everybody knows, even though she's muted.
That was the cue. Hey everybody, I'm Cassandra, the community ambassador, and so happy to be on air again. And I'm in San Diego right now, graduated from Berkeley, and yay for full-time employment. So you're sliding into my lunch break here. So happy to join.
Happy
Great.
lunch.
Thanks, Cassandra.
Cool. And joining us again is my friend Rob. Hello, Rob. You got unmute?
You're also mute.
Yeah. And also, just to give you a teasing, watch your language this time around, buddy. And unmute and introduce yourself.
Unmute.
You're still muted, my friend. We didn't mute you. We promise.
There we go.
There we go.
So, still muted. We'll come back to you, Rob. You're still muted. So, sorry, we cannot hear you.
Sylvia and Ruby.
Sylvia and Ruby, yeah. Hi, guys.
Hi.
By phone.
Yay.
Hey everyone. So I'm Sylvia.
And I'm Ruby.
And we're from DIY Girls. We're in Los Angeles.
Yay.
Fantastic. All right. Rob, can we hear you?
I don't know. Can you hear me now?
We can. All right. So
I'll take these off. So I won't swear.
That's okay. It only made us re-edit that one.
It's okay. I didn't spend that much time on it.
Okay. So I'm the ed tech coordinator here at a school in Portland, Cal and Gable, and I'm also the founder and director of Tinker Camp, which is a camp that's been running for about 5 years. So I'm happy to be here.
Outstanding. Thanks for joining us, Rob. All right. And we may be joined later on by several other folks, again, in the last 20 minutes by any of you. So let's get started. Talk about some scenarios. Today is all about difficult or navigating difficult social emotional scenarios. So we thought we'd bring around a few of them to your, by popular request, one of the biggest ones was, what do we do with adult domination?
Oh, wait, we've just joined by Jackie Moore, who was one of our scheduled guests. So let's have Jackie introduce herself if she can.
Hi, Jackie. As soon as you introduce yourself, we're going to dive right into social scenarios. So.
Okay, my name is Jackie Moore.
Okay.
Pleasure to join you.
Thanks.
Jackie's from Level Up. That's in Chicago. Which is a Maker Core host site from last year.
All right, we've gone inland a little bit. That's good.
Yeah.
So it's not just the West Coast anymore.
That's right.
All right. Thanks for being here, Jackie.
So we're just introducing our topics for today, and
yeah. So let's throw it out there. Imagine, if you can, because it's really hard. I'm sure none of you have ever seen it. You've got young children, maybe, and an adult who's doing everything for them. Maybe at your museum or your library or your makerspace. What's the kind of methods that you used in the past? And anybody can just shout it out here. Don't worry about talking over each other. What's your suggestions for dealing with that dominant behavior by some adults?
It depends on whether the adult's a parent or a worker. If the adult's a parent, that's the more difficult thing to deal with. But normally I come in and I will actually be rather physical about it, and that I may take it out of the parent's hand. And as I'm handing to the child, I'll ask a parent a question to try to get them to sort of divert their attention to something different and praise the child. So, for instance, Steve is working with his son, and he decides that he's going to use a hot glue gun to put them together. Then I'm going to simply say, Mr. Davey, that's a wonderful son you have here. And as I hand the item to him, and I'll turn to little Stevie and say, Stevie, show your dad what a great job you can do with this. And Mr. Davey, while he's doing that, can you tell him how you came to be here in the first place? How'd you found this? So by doing that, by getting the adult to talk and appealing to their ego, because normally that's what it is.
That's great. That's great.
Something that, and they lose sight of the fact of taking away from it. And by complimenting the child feels stronger because they don't have to go against their dad now. They're not going against their parents. They're simply going along to the facilitator who said, I can do this thing.
Nice.
That's great.
You're a sly character, Jackie. No parent's going to be able to have that. Any other suggestions, other possibilities?
So Jackie would take stuff out of their hands. I think I would, if there's extra materials, put stuff in their hands. So each the parent and the kid both have their own materials. So that's just another way of going about it. And also asking the kid questions and telling the kid to explain what they're doing to their parent is also something you can do.
Absolutely. And also, I would say the word praise came up, which is fantastic. I like to praise by saying what I notice and what I wonder about, by giving attention rather than specific, giving specific examples of my question and attitude. Just a note about praise there. I cut out somebody.
I think.
Was it Rob? No? Okay. Cool. Other ways of diverting attention.
Well, actually, I have somewhat of a different type of experience. I've had that situation happen, but also I've noticed in certain situations or events where I've had youth events and their parents were there, and how their parents act started affecting the kid. So if I was in conversation with the parent and he or she might have been questioning what was going on or not happy about it, I could see the behavior and the kid start to change. So what I would do would make sure we would leave the area so the kid would not see his parent acting that way, which affected how he worked with other kids. So, I mean, that's a different dynamic or scenario, but it can happen.
Well, your point's a good one, because I think that maybe we should back up a little bit and investigate the reasons why a parent would dominate. What are they thinking? What brings them to wanting to take over for their kid? What's their motivation to do that? I mean, it's usually pretty good intentions, but
Right.
Yeah. I mean, we want to assume and believe.
It might happen because they have certain expectations of the workshop or the class or whatever activity, and then that expectation is not being met, which is why they would be talking
What's going on?
Asking like they might not like what their own child. I mean, maybe their child's not participating enough, or
Right.
that happens
Yeah,
a lot.
A competitive type thing.
Or being sort of like the child's companion, and
Mhm.
not letting the child just make their own companions
Right.
with their peers there, and so
Yeah.
you see that happen a lot.
Yeah. Thoughts on that?
That was kind of, yeah, that was going to go off of my suggestion a little bit. I usually like to give parents a task to do. So you could say, oh, maybe hold this, or so kind of show them what a supportive role would look like. Because sometimes they don't know, and jumping in and doing something is their way of reacting because they don't know it's okay to just, be supportive and sit and watch.
Yeah. And I would add, it's okay for adults and children to collaborate together too. Yeah. There's a difference between domination and working with, and you can model that kind of collaborative effort by maybe stepping in and collaborating a little bit with the child himself. It involves asking them questions. Do you want to do this? What do you think about doing this? Or would you like me to help you do this? I think that one way when adults are trying to approach children in a collaborative sense is instantly put some authority on the child, ask them permission for something. It's a magic bullet in some sense sometimes to really let the child know you value what they think. And say, can you help me with this? All of a sudden, you're not the one who's doing things for them. You're asking their assistance. It works really pretty darn well. Any other thoughts on the motivations behind domination? What about?
Yeah, I've got one. It depends on the situation. You have to kind of read it. But sometimes I might actually have the kids compete against their parents. So, kids like to show their parents up. So if they're doing some kind of collective thing or their parents are taking over, asking that, kind of setting up a scenario where they're like, hey, do you think you could make something that's a lot different than your mom or your dad's, and then kind of encourage them to maybe kind of do this parallel creation, and they can, there's a little bit of a challenge there for the parent then to just be also watching what the kid's doing and just kind of be able to step back and give them a little bit of room not to have to do what the kids are doing. Yeah.
And one thing you might give them to do is something that supports you. I mean, say you've got a lot of materials out and you're starting to support a lot of people. You see a parent and you take on the attitude that they're helping a lot with their child because they want to help in general. So you can reflect back to them, hey, I see that you're really engaged in this, and you're really interested in this whole thing. Can I get you to help support things in general, or help man the glue gun station, or help organize supplies, or can I use that enthusiasm, that energy that you're showing? That way you're inviting them in a positive direction to do something that's not just solely fixated on their children.
Well, and I wonder too if you could, the idea just popped in my head, if there's enough parents around, getting the parents talking to each other instead of looking at their own kids. So have them share have the parents engage in some storytelling or some interaction that allows them to, kind of, if they're afraid of having their kids look at kind of in a bad light because they need to have, what they're making needs to look a certain way, they can still, give kudos to their own kids by telling some stories with other adults, and that kind of, then you can start building some different relationships too, and they could be looking at other kids, and it puts them in a situation where they could be watching other kids where they don't have that same kind of feeling. They can just be like, oh, what is this other kid doing?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm curious about something. The question you asked originally suggested that the parent might have been problematic. I'm curious, has anyone actually run into that situation where you've had a parent who's just so wrong that, I don't know any better way of putting it, whether the parent's interaction is harmful to the kid's sense of well-being? Have you? It does happen, unfortunately, especially when I'm dealing with teens and older kids, where the parents mean well, but the dynamics between a child and a teenager is such that it's not very positive. Before I tell how I handled it, I'm curious, anyone had the situation where you actually had to intervene?
Yeah.
Yeah, I bet we all do. You want to share an example?
Well, yeah, I can say for myself, I was a music teacher or a drum instructor for middle school last year, and it was this it was strange. It was good, but yet strange. This one parent would come to our rehearsals every day, every time that we had a rehearsal, but he would always, if his child messed up, he would always, hey, you need to do this, or hey, da da da, and several times I ignored it, but I started to see how it affected the kid, and what I would do is one approach I took, so I kind of talked to the parent, like, and asked him, what is it that you see that your kid is doing wrong, and why is it so bad? Because everybody's on the same level, we are all learning, and I'm the expert in the situation, and I don't think that he's doing a bad job. He's just trying to learn. His learning curve is not up to, where it should be, and he gave me a lot of da 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 whatever. And so basically, a lack of a better word, so I said, so instead of, how about you try to help him more or less, if you think he's wrong later outside of practice, versus trying to interrupt the practice, and or the teaching session that's going on. Yeah.
Just a tactful reminder of where he's at.
Yeah.
I think what I've noticed time and time again is the rescue instinct. Oh, my child is struggling with this, and you can see a parent body language like, oh, I want to do that because the child's struggling so much. My favorite moment at the Maker Faire was this 3-year-old child for over 20 minutes. Our Maker Vistas were working on this. Was at a station where they were invited to use hardware to screw in things with screwdrivers, different size nuts and bolts and everything. Took some effort, took some coordination, a lot of hand-eye coordination for a very young child. And yet this child struggled and did it and was delighted by her actual actions for over almost close to half an hour. And the parent sat back and watched that struggle happen. The Vistas that were helping out let it happen, gently handed tools if something was, tried different screw sizes if they saw a really big mismatch between holes, but never took the tool out of her hand and started screwing things into the block for her. It was the restraint of frustration. Other stories about specific examples like that Jackie's asked for.
I was at an exhibit once. It's actually at the Exploratorium, and so I encountered, there was this really cool device that it's like this bicycle wheel that had this big thick rope attached to it, and it would spin, and you could kind of touch the rope. And there was this young kid with their parent there, and I mean, I wasn't even in charge of this exhibit. I was just there watching, and I was really intrigued by what the kid was doing. But the parent kept saying, "No, you can't do it this way." And it was really, I noticed the kid stopped exploring, and I didn't know this kid, I didn't know the parent, I didn't want to really jump in there, but what I ended up doing was I kind of started exploring with the kid at the same time.
Yeah.
So I didn't really jump in and take over, but I kind of, in some ways, I allowed the kid to see me exploring. And in some ways, it allowed the kid. Then I kind of backed away, and I think the parent kind of saw that there's other opportunities and other things you could do, and then they let their kid explore more like the way I was doing it. And so that was just kind of this nonverbal way to just kind of open up possibilities.
Right, and non-confrontational in a way as well. You demonstrated the solution. That's a great segue towards our next topic, which is very related to domination, which is the kind of language that adults often use that will shut down creativity. How do you shut down? So it happens too often. A child's idea is shut down by somebody telling them that something's not possible or that'll never work. What are the kind of ways that you can demonstrate through modeling or the language that you can use that's similar to what Rob was talking about? Showing the possibilities to somebody who's been shutting down creative exploration rather than having it be shut down by the adult. Any suggestions for?
I mean, I'll jump in there again because I have something off the top of my head. So sometimes when we do stuff at Tinker Camp and parents are coming, we'll have like a list of questions to ask, like for parents. So that are prominent, like if you don't, these are good questions to ask. They'll just be there. And we'll use that as a tool to encourage people to use those as a reference point when they're working with their kids. So, you know, it's just a visual that they can see that they can think about. Because they might want to be asking questions, they just don't know what to ask.
Yeah, that's a really nice point. You might actually consider having that part of your project planning for the summer or camp planning is like have a sheet or a piece. What is it we're doing? What are things you might ask of people, not just your child, but anybody, or that's something you can plan for, those questions, and actually will help and guide your. If you don't have great questions to ask, it's kind of a sign that something is not as rich as it can possibly be, right? So, yeah, I love that. Ample questions. We're all for the inquiry-based approach.
Sylvia and Ruby, you look like you guys were going to say something.
Like, when can we jump in here?
Yeah.
Now.
No, yeah, I love what Rob said, because I've been thinking about that a lot lately, just before, like, to train our Maker Corps members, and just, like, what are the questions that we can gather. So, Rob, I'd love to see what you've come up with, and we could, you know, share ours as well.
Sure.
But yeah, we talked about this during our storytelling development camp, and I think it was you that said, you know, ask, you know, does your object or whatever you're making have a name? And I've actually been trying that, and wow, that really sparks so much in a kid. So that's one of them. And do you have anything?
I think to activate creativity amongst the kids, and so it doesn't, and for the adults helping them, is asking them questions and having I'm a big fan of ideation sessions and like coming up with ideas beforehand before you start on a project to really stimulate their creativity. And then when the child is really engaged in the project, it just comes naturally to help them when they need the help. And I don't interfere with their projects because they're so like in love with their projects and they really want to get it finished and like complete their vision, that you just help them along the way. I think also when you ideate with the kid, they feel valued, they feel that their opinion really matters and that their project is so important, because it is. And just encouraging them that what they're doing is really cool and really amazing.
Yeah, and it takes a lot, like being that mindful. I feel like if someone's struggling, like I have to actively, like before I approach some kids, a group of girls, I have to actively tell myself, okay, Sylvia, like, how are you going to approach it? Don't say anything, only ask questions. Like, that's how I kind of start out. But yeah, it's hard. It takes practice to be that mindful when so much is going on. So it's a constant thing to think about.
I like how you're all setting the tone in the very beginning. You can avoid so many of these struggles in the very beginning if you set the tone.
Yeah.
And if you're setting up a class, for example, you can very much set this sort of ideation tone where everybody's valued and heard. That takes care of a lot of the problems, less stress for the adult who might otherwise dominate, that sort of thing. And less of the other scenarios that we'll talk about as well, which is, maybe we'll go right into those.
The opposite of still ways of balancing group work, but what happens when it's an over-dominant student? What if it's one of the peers? What do you do when someone is perhaps using all the cool tools and no one else is able to? What do you do in that situation?
Hogging the stuff. It does happen, right? Over-enthusiastic, perhaps, and then we'll run in this whole inclusion thing so that we can kind of have the whole conversation without being too directed. But we're also interested in, you're left out intentionally by another peer. Perhaps we're concentrating on peers now.
Left out unintentionally.
Yeah, unintentionally you're left out, right? You self-selected to be left out. You've either not interested in it, you don't want to do it, or you're insistent that you're going to do it by yourself, all on your own, away from other people. When's that all right? How can you bring somebody back in to collaborate if that's one of the goals of what you're doing? So the general role of inclusion among peers. Go. Go, you genius people.
I think Ruby, we were talking about this yesterday, and Ruby had something to say about having the kid, like making sure the kid knows that their opinion is valued and asking them that question of fairness.
Yeah, again, making them feel valued and like, what do you think is fair? Do you think it's fair that you're hogging? Well, not saying that, but like, what do you think is fair for the group? And then that gets them thinking of what is fair, and then they start sharing just asking them the questions and making them feel really engaged and valued, really. Just, it triggers something in their mind where, like, I should be sharing and I shouldn't be selfish, and this is a community we're all together here.
Yeah, and like, oh, like you're actually asking me about my opinion. Like, oh, that makes them feel a little bit more confident. And also just making group work look attractive. I always like, if someone's kind of not into it, I always just make it look really cool, like kind of, like hang out with them and make sure like the projects also like have certain roles. And that's, I think, our job as mentors, that we need to create these projects that can be easily broken down into parts. And that's something to think about when doing group work. When someone doesn't want to work on their own, or who wants to work by themselves, we usually kind of just let that develop, and see it out. Also, like continue to, suggest tasks if they want to join back into the group, but
we don't force anyone to collaborate if they don't feel like it. Maybe they're having a bad day, or maybe like they had their own little problems within the group and they just want to be by themselves, and we acknowledge that. And because we're just exposing these girls to these activities and these projects and this whole world of making, and we want them to explore collaboration and also to explore working by themselves, because some people work better isolated.
But yeah, being in a collaborative effort is like the real world. So it's a little bit of both, but we avoid forcing it like directly. So it's a lot of like, talking it through and again setting the tone in the beginning. So it doesn't happen right away, I think.
I've got a story if nobody else does.
Okay.
All right. So, teenage girls. The situation that I've dealt with in many times tinkering camps, that sort of thing, can sometimes be very challenging of each other. And this goes for any peers, but I've seen some very major clash in energy. So one time in a camp where teenagers that had been known each other their whole school experience were confronting new teenagers they had never met before. They kind of clashed. They kind of questioned each other. It was interesting. And the new student in the class that didn't know these folks before was fortunately a very strong young woman who was had a good sense of herself, and so took these challenges and just kind of smiled and nodded and didn't engage in a sense. So she did, but it got me thinking: why do these folks feel challenged? They feel challenged to their social structure. They feel challenged that their friends might, they felt challenged by the qualifications of this new person. So I worked on ways in the camp of giving them positions of authority and things to share with other folks. For example, one of the challenging teenagers, I went and taught how to solder, and she was the only one in the tinkering camp that I taught how to solder. The rest of the camp, she was the authority who taught everybody else, including the new teenager who had been challenging before. Then felt less insecure, and they became friends by the end of the camp. But it was initially this big clash, but took away the insecurity in some ways, and allowed them to kind of play out that little clash as well. I mean, sometimes you can't intervene too much. They're really getting calibrated. So you have to give them a little time to struggle. Yeah, trust the kids sometimes with guidance and support.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this particular question is probably one of the most difficult ones to come up with an easy solution, especially in kind of like these week-long or day-long situations. For real collaboration to happen, people have to feel so connected with each other, and they have to feel like they can take risks. And I think oftentimes in the making situations, that's just never going to be the case. The tinker camps that I've run that are week-long, that a lot of kids, they don't know each other, oftentimes things will work really well just because of the nature of the group of kids. And we could do the same kind of activities the next year and the next week or whatever, and there's a different group of kids, and you can't really plan for it. One of the things that I just think about is really the thing I do have control over as the creator is really to try to set up situations that require kids to collaborate in a way that's really allows kids from all sorts of different abilities to join in. So it tends to be lower risk, high creativity, and but also things that really require people to work together. Because there's some tasks that you put together that you don't really need to work with another person. You don't need multiple people. You don't need, if you do something where you have to have like 6 hands to do it, then, that's great. But if you have really 2 hands and 2 eyes and that's all that it really takes, it tends towards people kind of working on their own. So those kind of challenges that require people even just physically needing to hold things that can bring people together.
I guess the Lawrence Hall of Science, one of their solutions for this challenge was during our animation camp, a week-long camp over the summer, we divided it up into smaller groups, and then within those groups, each kid would have a role. So, one would be a director and a producer and a writer and things, and we would be very frequently changing those roles so that people wouldn't get too ingrained or have the idea that, they could only fit in one. And we would even switch up the groups too. So to just reinforce the idea that change is okay, working with other people is okay, and also try and give them that ownership. So that was a very structured example of trying to include multiple people, but that's one thing that we've tried.
Nice.
So, when I hear the question, there are a lot of variables here. And I get the impression that the type of program I do is different from most, in that we tend to run our engagements several weeks engagement. And so the students are taught up front that collaboration is not an option, that's the whole purpose of the entire process. But to make certain that they have some time that they can feel comfortable, we actually have 3 different levels of engagement. There's a full camp project where everybody must contribute. There are small groups activities that they can work on, and there's individual projects. So they get some freedom over when they address their individual project. So if you're having a bad day and you don't want to communicate with anybody, you can opt to work on your individual project and collaborate when you feel the need. But I'm dealing with teenagers, and I don't. I think it's kind of important they understand that they have to work through the difficult things. So if someone is unable, sorry about that, if someone is unable to get past their discomfort, actually engage in the way they need to at the time, then I feel it's kind of our responsibility to teach them those tools. So sort of a fake it till you make it kind of approach. You don't have to feel like collaborating to collaborate. You don't have to like your partner to work with them well. You don't have to have, because in the real world you don't pick your coworkers. You take what you have, and so the way that we try to. Well, maybe Steve, you can, but
we get lucky.
Yeah. But what we try to do is to find something bigger than themselves for them to rally around, and that's usually the project itself. So where they do have a lot of say-so and a lot of freedom is choosing what they want to work on as the project. If it's the full group project, they can choose which piece to work on. And the same is true within a small group, you can choose the role. But we don't give them the choice to not collaborate. Someone's really determined to reach me. Sorry.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
But
I think Jackie's got a great point, because I think the idea that collaboration it's not always peaceful. Collaboration requires that kind of give and take, and it takes some working out the kinks. And if we teach kids that collaboration is only about agreeing with everybody, that's not really collaboration. Then you just kind of down, and it's kind of the lowest common denominator then. Yeah. So I think that's a great point. It's our job to help them figure those things out.
And that's part of the messy part of making. We talk about the making being messy in the physical sense, but it's messy when you're trying to work with other people's ideas and thoughts. And it's a teaching opportunity we shouldn't miss.
I would say that you can be a guide as an adult, or you can be patient and you can wait and have some trust that situations can be worked out. The whole reason we have play as a species is to get in these conflicts, to work them out in a safe kind of zone. I must say that some of the most clever social conflict solutions I've ever seen have been worked out by kids, let alone their own devices on how to solve it. Much more clever than what I might have come up with, for example. Just as long as they're you're hanging back a little bit and letting it happen, letting that clash and messiness happen every once in a while. Safety in mind. Yeah. This is a good time to remind folks that we're actually going to be inviting people to join spontaneously. So if you're dying to say something or ask something and you've been watching, we have a link in the community that you can follow directly into this Hangout spontaneously. It'll pop up. It'll be right there. And you can join this discussion. So we're going to go ahead and open that up now. So you can pop in at any time, and then we'll just continue talking about this right now. We'll be continuing this vein, but also talking about meltdowns and frustration and meltdowns. So any particular advice about meltdowns? We've never seen it.
What do you do when someone is just plain frustrated?
Adults and children. Yeah. Any thoughts on meltdowns or any stories? Without using names, probably.
Right.
Yeah, I have one. Recently, it was kind of funny how it worked out. The school canceled a trip to Hurricane Harbor for our 5th graders, and it was like a big deal because, I mean, when you're in 5th grade, these field trips are kind of everything. Nothing else is really going on. So they came in, it was the same day as our showcase. So they came in, and they were very angry. It was kind of comical the way they were expressing themselves, but they were really serious. And like, they came in, and one particular student was yelling and expressing herself, which made me very happy because she had her opinion and she wanted everyone to know. But it was really disrupting everyone else. So that went on for a couple minutes. I noticed that it wasn't going to stop, so I took her outside, and at that point I took a huge cardboard tube with me, and I had her basically just cover one end, and I told her, hey, you have a lot of energy right now, so I want you to yell as loud as you can into this tube, and I'm going to do it with you. So we did that, and she loved it. And she walked in. Afterwards, she smiled. She walked in, and she's like, I'm done with my tantrum now.
Yeah.
That was like, I think a lot of it is she wanted attention at that point. So she kind of knew what she was doing, but I know that that's not always the case. So at some cases, kids are really going through something difficult in their life, and you may not know the backstory. So we haven't had anything too traumatic happen with our girls, fortunately. But I think, again, it takes a lot of mindfulness and never really ignoring that kid who's sitting there and, acting a little different. Again, our program runs all year long, so we kind of get to know these girls very well. So we know when they're not acting themselves. So, we don't ignore a frown kind of thing. So we're always asking them, like, hey, are you okay? Do you want to talk right now? Is that something that, So, like, we're always here if you want to talk, but also, again, not forcing them to dive into what's going on, because they may not want to talk about it. They may not know how. So.
I always make sure they know they don't have to tell me. It's like, I noticed this. I'm here if you need me. You don't have to tell me what's bugging you. It's okay if you want to keep that to yourself.
For sure.
I like to ask kids what they, at that particular moment, I mean, they're acting out for some reason, obviously, whatever it is. And I like to ask them, well, what do you need right now? Like, you need space? Do you need to be more, like, help me out? And again, like, you can't push them, but most kids, at least the kids I work with, the 8 to 13-year-old kids, for the most part, if they're having a hard time, if they're pissed off, they'll tell you, what they need. Usually more so when they're really angry, but that for me, that's a helpful question to at least give me some sense of what's going on.
I like to let them know that it's okay for them to detach, go away, do what they need to do, but that I want them back.
Yeah.
Say like, we want you here. I would like to have you back.
Yeah.
And when you come back, can you help me with this? Or like have something very specific to entice them to come back. I've noticed that you were really into this at this other day. Or it's tying into something very positive that they might have done before. Or boy, I've seen you like do this so well. If you get to that space, can you come back and do that again? Or let's do this. So you're inviting them to some positive aspect observed about what they can do.
So we actually provide a space for kids who need some time for themselves. It's a practice I started when we've had students on the autism spectrum come to us, and actually an autistic student taught me this approach because he told me once, I don't want to hear it, I need my space. On a period of time, take 10 minutes, and then we'll talk again. So what happens now is so some of the students I deal with have very serious problems they're dealing with, and I can't solve them in a few seconds, so I'm going to try to. But what I can give them is a promise that if they take a few minutes to collect themselves, that we can reconnect, decide whether or not a bigger conversation is necessary, and schedule that, and then remind them that they have to live in the moment, that whatever that set them off, they can set it aside for now. Let's get this done, and then it's important to follow up and truly keep my promise to talk with them later. And for that reason, that's an aside. We try to keep 3 people on site at all times. So if I need to, I can leave 2 adults behind while I go and talk to the other person in the hallway.
I love this topic and how specific we're getting, because this is what people really wanted and what they asked for. I want to leave some time at the end to talk about what we'll talk about next time, because we're going to all collectively decide what the next summer development camp session is going to be about. But I want to twist this a little bit for the remainder that we have for the documentation. So much of this social emotional strife that we're talking about can be avoided if the children are excited, engaged right in the beginning, from the very start. We know, and we've all experienced, the more engaged and invested and in charge these children feel, the better they're going to be. So let's share some stories. What are some times in your experience and your what you've provided for children where the kids have been just so beside themselves they're like bouncing up, down, they're all, what are the positive stories that we can share that have, from the very moment, have grabbed and engaged students? Because I know we got them. So let's hear about these stories where kids were just like so excited they're peeing their pants, because it happens.
I guess I can jump in on this one. This is kind of what I was thinking about when I was preparing for this hangout in terms of frustration. And I was thinking that frustration is so important. Just before it gets to that tantrum level, I know it's really frustrating to go through when you're making and you sometimes, hit that brick wall. And you see it when kids are making with you, but that moment is so important because it forces you to think outside of your box. It forces you to go to somebody else and ask for a different approach. So I love that, and I think it's very important that we allow kids to experience that without jumping in and have that savior thing that we were talking about earlier. And so we can notice just before kids are going to drift away. So and try and catch them right before that, and maybe pass the tool like I mentioned before, or model something that might help them and catch them and keep them engaged. But one thing that I practice in our space, because it's kind of a drop-in audience, so sometimes if the kid is leaving, it's not by choice and maybe the parent needs to go somewhere else and the kid can't stay with us, is to speak really quick in hypothetical situations. So if you had more time, what would you do to add on to your project? Or if you could continue this at home, how would you do that? So that kind of bridges the gap between frustration and also just like lack of time. We don't have any more time to spend on this, and it kind of leaves the door open. Kids want to come back and continue. So maybe that was a little leeway, a little segue into the super excited part and the tantrum part. Just wanted to put my 2 cents in.
No,
Yeah, thank you.
I like that. Thanks, because we still do need to talk about frustration in a sense.
Yeah.
But you can counter frustration sometimes with enthusiasm, sheer enthusiasm, and oh wow, I noticed you're struggling with this, but isn't that cool? You're struggling with this. Can I share your story of struggle with another person who might be feeling the same thing? Remind them that your frustrating situation is one that's shared by others, or that you yourself have shared. Like, oh man, when I was your age, my Lego towers were falling down left and right, or whatever. So, but let's hear some more stories about extreme engagement and awesomeness. Go ahead, Cassandra.
Oh,
Yeah.
hi, Cassandra.
Oh, thanks for joining
Thanks
us.
for joining
Happy
us.
lunch.
Thanks, guys. Thanks. Bye.
Take care.
Yeah. Any stories out there? Hyper engaged, super happy students.
Well,
Some
I mean,
example of something. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, go ahead, Jackie.
So the Makey has had some extremely enthusiastic responses. And typically it's because the kids, it was so unexpected. So we had a group of teens last summer who were playing with the Makey. They couldn't get to work right. They were having issues. They not so much because it was complicated, but because everybody knew what they were doing, but they didn't know how to work together yet. So they were their frustration level was high. But the minute that they got it to do anything, it was a joy to behold because they started yelling and screaming and jumping up and down. Now, this meant I took a big deal. We're talking about 15 and 16-year-olds who are super cool, and they don't yell and scream. It was one of those great moments that I wish I had captured because they got excited with each other, and two of the people who had been feuding all day long actually hugged each other because they were so excited about what had happened. And they were able then to take that moment of excitement and go forward with it and go push themselves a little bit further with the experience. And they discovered they worked better after that. And I think that it wouldn't have been nearly as much fun for them as exciting if they had not suffered first. They hadn't struggled first.
Rob.
Yeah, so I mean, just to build on that, I think always trying to set up situations where there's some kind of sense of awe or sense of wonder that's maybe a little ethereal and not you can't quite put your hand on it, but you know, having like for instance like the Makey, you know, you can kind of see it doing like why is it doing these kind of things, but one of the ways that I approached that just with the work I did was I really realized that kids would come into the camps that I was doing with a lot of enthusiasm in the beginning part of it, but carrying that enthusiasm for long periods of time was very difficult. And what I discovered, my partner and I discovered, was we kind of threaded kind of a story or a narrative that would help the making along. So, you know, there was kind of a bigger theme or a bigger idea that they were trying to move toward. So, you know, we've done many different kind of themed ones, but the one that kind of grabbed kids the most was this idea of that it was a survival making experience where they had to survive a week and build all these kind of things in the context of a zombie apocalypse. So they were just the idea of survival, and they had to survive for a whole week together, that their frustrations, they worked through those because they had this bigger group goal of survival. So while the initial making frustrations were difficult, that they were carried on by this story that they bought into, you know. So that having that bigger thing that it's not, I'm just not trying to make this rocket go, but I'm trying to, you know, I'm trying to get this message up into space somehow.
I had written down my notes here, elements of danger, challenge, ownership, surprise, coming together for others. You know, this the sense of helping and doing something. Like a certain time in the camp or day when things might be lulling a little bit, you might remind them that they're not the only people that might be doing this. That what are the ways that you might make it better for other people? And then you're like inviting their help. But there's also ways. I like this sense of this danger, this anticipation, this excitement. It needn't be real danger, but there's certainly perceived danger is awfully exciting. That can be done through stories or through like, oh my gosh, guys, be careful, bud. Do this.
I think one of those elements is like I like to use fire.
Yeah.
Because fire can be really dangerous, but it also can be perceived as a dangerous thing. And I've watched kids try to light a fire. They'll spend hours and hours because it's such a cool thing that if they can finally do it, you know, they've all seen it, but it's that they'll just keep working and working and working and working, and you know, it's because of kids playing with fire. I mean, that's a fun thing.
in a classroom one time for a reading group was reading this survival story, Hatchet, about this child who was stranded on a desert island with nothing but a hatchet. Every kid's fantasy to a certain point. No parents, all alone, struggle against the elements, you know. And these young boys were so convinced that if they had a hatchet, they could do anything. So indeed, I gave them a hatchet. We went out into a parking lot of the school, and I gave them 2 matches each because the protagonist didn't even have matches. I'm like, you think you can start a fire with the things you can gather and get a fire going in the middle of this parking lot here? And they're like, yes! And they were so excited by that danger of getting the fire going and so thrilled that I would let them do it. Of course, I knew that in some ways they never would get a fire going, and they didn't. Because if you don't know what you're doing with fires, and 2 matches is not enough,
Right.
it's windy. So we did light one in the end to get that payoff. But that they were so afraid that it was going to...
Yeah.
Olivia Ruby?
Oh yeah. I was just gonna refer to Ruby, and she was working on a skee ball project, and the idea. So like you guys created it, like you started with a creative sketch, right?
Yeah. So with the skee ball, it was that story of frustration and excitement all in one, where I asked the girls, like, for the showcase, what do you want to do? So we did this big project, and they ideated a skee ball machine, and we figured out how to make it, like the dimensions or like what pieces of cardboard we're gonna need, and then we started building it, and everything was going fine. Like they're painting it, and the showcase is around the corner, and next thing you know, they kind of built. It's almost done, and they figured out that the balls don't enter the slots where they wanted to do, and the showcase is like super. It was like in a couple of days, and they were super stressed and frustrated that it wasn't working, and then we tried to like cut, because it had legs in the bottom, so we cut the legs so it's a little tilted, but nothing was working, and then they needed all these supplies, and right before the showcase started, like 5 minutes before the parents came in and see all the projects, they got it to work. And it was a hit. It was a hit. Everyone loved it, and
so excited. I have this wonderful picture. Maybe I'll share it with you guys. And one of them is just like this. She's so serious, and she's like piercing her lips and throwing the ball. And the other one, everyone's like, yeah. I'll share it with you guys.
We live for those moments, do we not? Yeah. We know that they come. We know that that's why we're in this difficult and awesome business.
And like putting a skee ball machine together is really like out of cardboard. It's harder than it looks or seems. I was looking inside of their cardboard. Like, wow, there's all these slants, and it's just like a whole thing. I wouldn't be able to think of that. So I was impressed.
It seems like it would be that way.
We saw among many things at the Maker Faire this past couple weeks ago, schools that gave challenges to make pinball machines, which can have electromechanical elements. It can be purely mechanic. Have lights and everything, and so it's a similar vein of, the challenge to make something playable but also fair. It's a very deep and nice, and plus you're making this game. And some games you can tell a story while you're making it, right? Like the theme of a lot of pinball machines. It's almost like a story being told on the screen. Yeah. So these are very rich projects that invite that element of imagination and storytelling as well. Right. Makes me want to make a pinball machine or skee ball machine. That'd be fun too.
That's funny.
But yeah, I mean, I wonder if you can do a hybrid.
Oh.
We are looking at about 5 minutes left, which means that I would like to use this collective brain here, and it's still not too late to pop in and say hi and share a quick little story if you'd like. Okay, we know it's summer and everybody's working. It's true, actually, a lot of our Maker Corps members and mentors are actually in their sites right now. They can't all take lunches for this or whatever time zone you might be in. But you guys are here. What do you think would be valuable to talk about next time? Because I sure as heck have valued this conversation.
Yeah.
So what are you guys thinking as possible topics you'd like to have covered?
One of my perennial questions that I'm always trying to figure out is how to support or ensure somehow that kids will take their experiences and actually run with them outside of the work that I do with them. So, how do we develop that, that maker mindset with the work we do and encourage that to happen? And also, how do we figure out if that's happening or not? So when kids leave us,
Right.
That sounds like a fantastic topic. Any more? I mean, because that could take up a whole session, but I bet it would fit very well with other things. What do you guys think? DIY?
Yeah, like for our summer camps, we have a week. So I agree with Rob. I'd love to, how can we, after 1 week of being with the kids, like how can we keep it going? But also, how can we get that started? So I'm thinking like the first day, no one knows each other. We're from the same city, possibly, but there's middle schoolers. So how can we, like, because time is limited, how can we get them kind of an icebreaker status? Like, how can we get kids comfortable with each other in like 10 minutes? Or how can we?
Yeah, that's
fun
nice.
Activities that we can do to.
Well, I like this because we can give very specific examples, right? We can say, like, this is an icebreaker we know that might work in 3, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or whatever. I know, Jackie, you guys have likely got some nice icebreakers or things like that. But are you thinking any other topics as well, or?
I'm trying to think of the topics. Nothing specific comes to mind right now.
Okay.
I did a question about the first question, though.
Yeah.
Would it be worthwhile to share some resources along those lines for how to track making after you leave?
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Yes, Jimmy?
Just to kind of piggyback off of what Rob said, I will also would like to know, or maybe discuss, or if anybody has any ideas about it, like if there is a kid who might not completely want to continue down the road in STEM or whatever, how could we help him, or he or she, take those skills or thought processes that he learned from making, and how to apply them later in other things in life, or
Right.
other areas, or other fields that they might be interested in.
Yeah. That's a really good point, because everybody takes their creativity with them in some ways. They might not exactly relate it to the robots they just worked on, or the sewing they just worked on, or the play they just created. But so maybe they got something they love to do athletically.
Right.
There's a lot you can learn from the collaboration and the challenge and the dealing with frustration that you can take onto a team athletic field or an individual pursuit.
Yeah.
But your point is a good one. It goes very well into the what do you do with this experience and why is it valuable? I like to think at the heart of everything we're building better kids, confident, happier, more engaged, and especially more empathetic towards others. And if that's the only thing that ever comes out of any of this, I'd be the most happy person in the world. It's still the best possible outcome is to increase empathy and that sort of thing. So I think that's a fantastic topic area. Certainly it would be fun discussion, right?
Yeah.
I like it. Oh yeah, now we're already thinking who can we bite. It's at this point we should say we have not yet scheduled summer development camp session number 2. You may be happy to hear that the next time around I will not likely be participating because I'm actually going to take a vacation. So I'll be traveling between the East Coast and Portland, maybe a little bit back here in Berkeley, or Oakland. But the next topic around, I might pop in. I might not be able to keep myself out completely. I might pop in with a little window and then restrain myself. But these guys will probably take point, along with Lisa and Stephanie will pop in as well, or other folks in the office. But
yeah, we'll be scheduling it probably in about a month.
Yeah, we'll see.
Okay.
So,
cool.
Any final words from our guests?
Thank you all for joining us, by the way.
I know, we're going to end exactly on time just about. But
yeah.
I'm just going to say goodbye to you guys real quick. I'm so pleased to have you all on.
Okay.
And any resources that you were talking about that you want to share, please go ahead and share on our community. So thank you all so very much. This was a fun conversation.
Really
and
fun.
Very fun.
If you don't mind sticking around after we end the broadcast, I want to thank you again and more profusely.
Yeah.
So, all right, to the wider audience out there,
See you guys.
goodbye everybody. Until next time. End broadcast.